Thank you very much, Gina. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. Welcome to part one of the ACRL Health Sciences Interest Group sponsored webinar series on interactive online learning. My name is Anna Ferry, and I'm the incoming convener for the Health Sciences Interest Group. I am joined in moderating the session today by Annie Zeidman-Karpinski, who is our current convener for the Health Sciences Interest Group.
Hi, everyone.
The Health Sciences Interest Group is a place to network, share information, ask questions, and work on special projects and programs relevant to the academic health sciences. You can join our open email list, and I will be placing the link into the chat now for everyone.
It's there.
Oh, wonderful. It's there twice. The tiny URL that'll get you to our listserv. This listserv is not actually hosted by ACRL, so it is open to everyone to join regardless of membership. You can also visit our LibGuide for resources at the link that is being placed in the chat right now by Annie. And before we jump into today's presentation, we want to give everyone here today the chance to register for part two of our series. This will be happening on July 24th at the same time, 9 a.m. Pacific time, 10 Mountain, 11 Central, and noon Eastern time. This session will have a bit more of a focus on tools for engaging in interactive online learning. The link to register is going into the chat. And in this session, we will be hearing from Tessa Whitthorne at California State University, Dominguez Hills on building foundational information literacy skills through a course integrated LibWizard tutorial. This is for session number 2, the next time. We'll also be hearing from Alex Harrington at Harrell Health Sciences Library at Penn State University on Padlet for online instruction, and Paige Scudder from the Dartmouth College Biomedical Libraries on updating an in-person elective to online learning. So that's what you can anticipate for the second part of our series next time. But today, we're very excited to have 3 presentations. We'll be starting with Dr. Zara Premji and Dr. Alix Hayden presenting on transforming an interactive systematic review methods workshop series from face-to-face to the virtual environment, tools and strategies for synchronous instruction. Following that will be Megan Darmond and Faye Mazia, who are presenting quick and easy accessibility tips. And finally, we'll be finishing off with Molly Higgins and Rachel Keiko Stark, who will be presenting live searching beyond show and tell. So that's the plan for today. Due to our time constraints, we may not be able to respond to questions directly throughout the presentations, though we encourage a lively conversation in the chat. Please do remember, if you haven't already, to change the to drop list in the Zoom chat to say all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your questions. Live captions are being done by the use of either Google Slides or PowerPoint and Microsoft Office 365. We also want to give a huge thank you to both Alois and Gina at ACRL for helping to set up the ACRL Zoom webinar space. This webinar is being recorded and a link will be sent to all registered attendees following the session. So now, without further ado, if we want to get started with Dr. Zara Premji and Dr. Alix Hayden, if you are ready to go, I will go ahead and stop sharing our slides here.
I am. Oh, and I forgot to put a different background behind me. I'm sorry about that. My name is Alix Hayden, and I am the Nursing and Kinesiology Librarian for the University of Calgary. And my colleague is Zara Premji, who used to be a health sciences librarian, and she is now a business librarian specializing in business systematic reviews. So I'm going to talk about a series of workshops that we created. We received a teaching and learning grant in 2018, I believe, to develop a series of in-depth, scaffolded, sequential series of systematic review workshops. We designed these workshops to be face-to-face, and the content was informed by a scoping review of the literature, yet to be published, discussions with colleagues across the country, and our own experiences from teaching. Our workshops included explanations, demonstrations, hands-on activities, as well as group activities. So these slides highlight the content that we did. So that was the first workshop. Our second workshop was developing data collection strategies, which was 2.5 hours because of the hands-on searching. In both of our workshops, face-to-face and online, we had lots of interaction, lots of questions. In class, students would stop us at point of need, and during online, they would use chat mostly. It really helped, we discovered, to have 2 of us teaching, so one could monitor chat and respond, and then interrupt. It's not really interrupt, but provide guidance as required. Workshop 3, it's hard to look at all my notes and my timer. Workshop 3 was the translation session. Again, lots of activity, including screening titles and abstracts. We did notice that in the face-to-face sessions, students would go a little rogue and go off and do their own searching on their own topics, rather than sticking with what we had planned. In the online environment, everybody was more focused on staying with the content that we were trying to deliver and the examples that we were using. When we were moving from face-to-face to online, we kept our learning objectives and essentially the activities the same. So our first activity we had was Pico, because how can you teach about systematic reviews without teaching about Pico? We handed out this exact paper from here, where we had students identify the Pico elements and come up with a researchable question based on something very simple, like, is pet therapy effective? Students worked in small groups and reported back verbally to the big group. In the online activity, Zara, being an absolute wizard with technology, created a Google form. The students still needed to go through each of the elements: population, intervention, comparison, and outcome. And then at the end, again, still create a researchable question. This time, because we changed our scenario to pet therapy, we used for this activity, is social media harmful? We then shared the final question through Zoom, where everybody could see all the questions that people had come up with, and there, you could see the great diversity and the in-depth that everybody had. It was a really dynamic way of starting conversations about how you can take such a simple question using Pico and come up with 40 different ways of approaching that question. Our inclusion and exclusion activity was a sit-up, stand-down activity. In face-to-face, we asked everybody in the classroom to stand up and went through a series of the inclusion and exclusion criteria. So we could show and demonstrate how you start with 6,000 references and whittle it down based on really good inclusion and exclusion. In the online, we used the yes/no option for participants. So again, we made sure everybody could see the participant list, and everybody raised their hand to begin with. And then we asked the series of questions. Our questions were actually are simple, but they show a little bit of complexity. So this is actually what we use in the class. We work at the University of Calgary, so we we presume everyone's from the U of C, and that everybody who is not from the U of C, please sit down. So we only have so everybody's still standing at this point or raising their hand. Next, because we're doing pet therapy, we don't want individuals who do not have a pet. So those who do not own a pet, sit down. Then those who have bunnies, kitties, birds, snakes, all of those kind of pets, we ask them to sit down because we're interested in dogs. But then we get to the complexity of this. What happens with people who have a dog or two, like I do, and a cat? So we can lead into the discussion through showing how many people have, and there's always a little bit of confusion going, I don't know if I should be yes or no when we get, because they have a dog and another pet. So this leads into the discussion of, when you're doing data extraction, will you be able to export the data you need? So even though it's a simple inclusion and exclusion, it does help show the complexity and why you need to define it well. Our next activity focuses on mining seed papers. And I will say this is probably, the concept of doing this is new to students and probably one of the best takeaways they have from this session. So in class, we handed out all these papers with each article record on a different sheet of paper. We color coded everything and they scanned individually. Some people did it in pairs for keywords and subject headings. We had already done a demonstration of where these were in articles. In the online environment, we provided them with the titles, and they had to go and search a specific database to find them. We did this with having first demoing how to find a title, and then how to read a record, where are the keywords, where are the author supplied keywords, and where are the subject headings. Then we had the students go into a Google Doc, which we provided a link through chat, and had them start to fill out the Google Doc form. You can see that there's a lot of confusion still on what might be a subject heading for pet therapy, because people are using psychiatric treatment. So it really generates, when you can see this, how to get into the different, what really means the topic that you're looking for, what is the concept. So it actually creates a lot of discussion for that. And we also use this Google Doc for our next activity of translation. So we can continue, because usually the same students continue in the course, the 3 sessions. So we can continue with, here we created this last time, and we can work from this. We also do this sometimes in actually breakout rooms. So there's smaller groups working on it, rather than depending on the number of people. And I think I'm going to attempt to swap over to Zara.
Thank you. So one of our activities in the 3rd workshop relates to study selection, which includes both title and abstract screening, as well as full text screening. When we initially designed this workshop, we wanted students to understand what it is like to participate in screening, and for them to see how difficult it is to achieve consensus and agreement on screening decisions. So this activity highlights the importance, again, of detailed and clear eligibility criteria and the need for discussion among the team before screening begins. So the in-class version of this activity, we simply created a handout, as you can see on the screen, which included some titles and abstracts of a few records that could meet the inclusion criteria, as well as a space for writing down the decisions. We allowed participants up to 10 minutes to complete the activity individually or in pairs. And then as a class, I would say, raise your hand if you said include, and then based on how many people said include, we would have a discussion on why someone chose to exclude or why they chose to include. In the online version, we first had a big discussion of how we would do this. So it made sense to use Zoom polls, which is awesome. We planned this when we set up the Zoom session a week before the class. We figured out that actually there is a character limit on the questions section of the poll. So we couldn't put an entire abstract. So we quickly figured out a workaround, and that was to display the title, the abstract, and the eligibility criteria on the screen as part of our presentation, as you can see on our slide. And then we created a Zoom poll with just the title and the decision, and then students had to select. And actually, when we moved to this format, we were able to increase the complexity of the activity by asking students to pick the reason for exclusion if they were going to exclude. We would allow 2 minutes for each poll, and then Zoom allows you to share the results of a poll so students can immediately see how the class voted. And this was really powerful and visible because in the 9 workshop, or the 4 times we ran this, we got consensus on one title. So there's rarely ever consensus. And we actually found that the added requirement for stating the reason for exclusion led to a richer discussion on how different individuals were interpreting the criteria. And we know that students really enjoyed this activity because it was mentioned in our workshop evaluations. So we talked about 4 different tools or features that we used when we went online, and each of them have their benefits and challenges. So here we have a summary of some of these benefits and challenges based on our experiences. So the Zoom polling is a great feature. It can be used in so many different ways, and we certainly use them frequently. They're easy to create, launch, and share the results with the class. And you can see how many students have submitted a response in real time once you launch it. So if you find that the 2 minutes was not enough for this particular title abstract, you can wait a little longer. They're also really great for a quick 1-minute interactivity or a quick assessment of learning or a knowledge check. And they can be used in combination with information that is on your presentation slide or on its own. The main drawback for using Zoom polls is that you're limited to multiple choice, and only the host can create the poll. So for those sessions where you are a guest presenter and not the original host, you would have to get the original host to create your polls in advance. The Zoom yes/no buttons are also great for quick interactivity. They can be used to ask a question related to content where the answer is yes or no, or even a logistical question such as, should we take a break now? And we've definitely used it for that. It's easy because it's built into the Zoom platform and doesn't require any pre-planning. You can use it at any time. But the biggest drawback is that everyone can see what a given participant said, so it's not anonymous. And for certain questions, students might feel shy to say no. The other thing is that the reaction, the yes or the no, stays up next to the participant's name unless they either take it down or the host clears all. Google Forms is an alternate way to ask a question. So that's not multiple choice, for example, and you want students to submit a response. They're really easy to create, and you can create a variety of questions in a Google form. You can also incorporate things such as media and video into it. And you can make them as long or as short as you want. And again, as students submit, you can see in real time how many forms have been submitted. However, using a Google form requires the user to navigate away from Zoom into a browser window, which is not a big deal if your students are on a laptop or a computer, but perhaps could be a concern if your students primarily use a mobile device. So I recently tested out a virtual escape room created using Google Forms for a colleague. So you can see that actually Google Forms can be used in a variety of ways, depending on the purpose of your activity. Google Docs is also a great choice for online learning. It's excellent for collaborative work or even just sharing instructions for what students need to do in a breakout room. The docs are easy to create, as you know, and there's no limit on the number of participants that can contribute simultaneously. Participants do not require an account to contribute if you set the permissions right. And these documents can be saved and downloaded or reused as needed. And the great part is students are used to using Google Docs, so they're very familiar with it. However, the main drawback, again, is that students will require a secondary window to be open if they need to be in a Google Doc, as well as on Zoom. And we have noticed that Google Docs do require a significant amount of bandwidth. That being said, we definitely still use Google Docs in a variety of ways in our teaching. And in our experience, students have enjoyed collaborating with their peers on the same document. And we often see a lot of contribution when we have Google Doc activities. One of the things that we've noticed overall is that our preparation time for this workshop series has dropped. And this is because electronic versions of the activities are easily copied and reused, which is an added benefit. And I think that some of the changes that we have made to our activities, we are going to choose to keep when we go back to our in-person workshops. So this brings us to the end of our presentation. We're always happy to share our experiences with redesigning our workshops for the online environment. So please feel free to reach out to us via email anytime. And if there's some time left, we're happy to take a question or two. Thank you.
And we were asked if we would share our slides, and we will certainly do that and work with the organizers for the session on how to best to get them out.
Yeah, if it is agreeable to all of the presenters, we hadn't actually discussed this ahead, but we will actually happily host these slides from any of these presentations on the ACRL Health Sciences Interest Group LibGuide. So they will be posted there if the presenters have agreed to share them in that location. So we will share the link to that LibGuide again in just a moment.
Yes, absolutely. There's a question. Will we consider, the question is coming fast and furious. Would we consider continuing online classes even when face-to-face is an option? We have had much better participation face-to-face. Our numbers are probably at least double. We have booked out every time. The online sessions have been at least double of what the face-to-face ones are. And we have absolutely said we will continue doing this online, probably doing both when we get to go back full time.
One of the cool things is we've had people that aren't in the city that now can attend, right? So we had someone from Denmark who's doing a postdoc and happens to be away this semester attend. So I think we will definitely keep with that. Someone asked if we would share our lesson plan. We'll definitely share it privately via email. Please feel free to reach out to us.
And we, one more question, thanks.
Who is your typical attendee? So this is discipline agnostic for us. So this is across the U of C. So we get we get some undergrads, very few, those that are research assistants, mostly grad students and junior faculty from disciplines across campus, including education, social work, psychology, management. We've had environmental sciences, and of course the typical health sciences as well.
Yeah. And we tend not to even advertise on the Health Sciences Library webpage. We do online registration, but we don't actively send out the announcement to Health Sciences because we do feel that sometimes other disciplines are intimidated having the Health Sciences, who are usually more knowledgeable about the systematic reviews. Zara, do you want to include your email address in the poll?
Yes, and I think that we probably ran out of time.
Yes.
Yeah, and how often do you offer the workshop throughout the year? Our first ones were in November. It was a pilot study. We revised based on the feedback, and then we did, our second one was started February when we got caught with COVID. So then we did one session in person and then had changed it. So we've done it 4 times, you said?
Once a semester is what we aim for, but now if we go back to face-to-face, we might do online and face-to-face one each.
Yeah.
Right.
And we're also planning to do discipline specific, just for the examples.
All right, we do have to move on to the next presentation. So if Megan and Faye are ready to go, thank you so much, Alix and Zara. We appreciate it. It was an excellent presentation. Next up is Megan de Armand and Faye Mazia, who are presenting on quick and easy accessibility tips.
Thank you. I'm just gonna, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Hello and welcome to our accessibility presentation. We will be sharing tips and information that we hope can be easily implemented into your practice as librarians and educators. This is the agenda. So the first thing we're going to talk about for web accessibility is fonts. For web accessibility, be sure to use sans serif fonts rather than a serif font. A serif font is a type of letter form that has extending features or serifs added to the letters. And an example of a serif font is Times New Roman. As you can see in the figure, all the portions highlighted in red are unnecessary for the reader to identify the letter. Therefore, a sans serif font does not have these extending features, and it's more simplistic and easier for the reader on using a digital screen. The most popular sans serif fonts used today in an office setting are Arial, Calibri, and Helvetica, and Tahoma, but there are many more. So you can visit TypeWolf, which is a blog, for the latest fonts that can be used for web design. A final note about fonts is you want to avoid the overuse of bold, italic, and all caps. Color contrast is another important element of web accessibility. By now, I'm sure most of us are aware that the colors red and green can be difficult to differentiate for some people. But the World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C, has developed a few more guidelines to ensure web pages are viewable for all. First, it is recommended to avoid using primary red colored text altogether, and also the blue-yellow color text combination. The main objective for text color and accessibility is to have a high contrast, or a 3:1 contrast. To understand this yourself, or to test out other color combinations, you can check out the contrast checker on webaim.org. And I believe Anna is going to include this link in the chat. So this is WebAIM, and here's the accessibility checker. As you can see, I have my font color as its primary blue, and my background color is white. And right now, that passes all of the WCAG AA and AAA tests. But as I make the color, the font color lighter, it starts to fail these tests as the font fades into the background and becomes more and more difficult for the reader. So for links, most of the tips for links are to provide accessibility to those who use the screen reader assistive technology. So first, always label your links instead of just posting the full URL. The first example, visit the health science interest group here, followed by the full URL, would be challenging for people who use a screen reader because the screen reader would read out the entire URL. Next, avoid spatial or visual references, such as the second example. To visit the health science interest group, click here. And that's because it might not always be clear to what here is referring. Furthermore, you should avoid other spatial or visual reference language, such as click on the icon on the right or look at the photo on the left. So best practice dictates using clear labels for hyperlinks, such as in the third example, to visit the health science interest group, and that is the label for the link. A final note about linking is to always ensure links are underlined. Some content management systems will change a hyperlink to a blue colored font, but they won't underline it. And blue text can be hard for some people to see or differentiate. So underlined text is the surest way that links will be clear to all. Always remember to include alternative text when using photos and pictures on your web page. In addition to photos, you should also include alternative text for infographics, such as graphs and tables, describing what the infographic represents. You also want to avoid using tables when not presenting data, and avoid using tables just for style purposes. To add alternative text in an image in Google Suite and Office Suite, you can simply right-click the image and you will see a drop-down menu with the choice to add alternative text or alt text. It is also available in LibreOffice Suite Impress, but it is labeled description instead of alt text. So here it is an example of the HTML tag for a photo with alternative text from one of our subject guides. So if you are familiar with HTML or source code or whatever, when you're using your content management system, you can see The alt text just goes right after the beginning image tag. Abbreviations and acronyms might not always be clear for two reasons. First, someone might not know what the abbreviation or acronym stands for. Second, for those using assistive technology, such as a screen reader, the abbreviation might be read as a word instead of being spelled out. To help with both these issues, you can use the HTML tag ABBR around the abbreviation, and including the title in the abbreviation tag will create a pop-up with the full name when you hover your cursor over the abbreviation. So for an example, I'm going to go to one of our LibGuides. And you can see underlined here, I use the HTML tag for the abbreviation and acronym. So it's underlined. And to know what TUN stands for, you can just hover your cursor over and you'll see TUN stands for Toro University, Nevada. That concludes my part of the presentation. I will pass it over to Megan.
Oops, sorry, I realized I was muted. I hope the tips that Faye has shared offer some insight and quick solutions. I want to share another tool with everyone, the PowerPoint Accessibility Checker. The checker, first, I'm only aware that PowerPoint has this, a robust tool. I know I've tried to use something like this in Google Slides and LibreOffice, but I think you have to have a third-party app, and I haven't tested those apps, but I have been using this PowerPoint checker. And for me, I have the 2013 version of PowerPoint at my workplace, and it's under File Info, and then in the middle there, you can see the check for issues. And when you click on that, it will go to a drop-down menu, and then you choose Check Accessibility. And once you check that accessibility, it will open a panel that will tell you not only what the issue is, but also why to fix it and how to fix it, which I feel like is both really, or all three are really important to know. So this one is highlighting that my reading order is incorrect and problematic for screen readers. And this is something that comes up for me often because I get focused on the aesthetics of my slides instead of the accessibility of my slides. So I wanted to use that as one of the examples in case others also have that, also experience that. So the how to fix is probably the most important part for what to do and how to correct the issue that you're having. And then I also have a screenshot here of just one other issue that might come up, since Faye touched on this a little bit, with hard to read text contrast, so that the PowerPoint Accessibility Checker will also highlight that if your contrast isn't great enough. So the next thing I wanted to share about is audio described video. Some of you may already be familiar with this. This is new to me, but it's not new in the world of accessibility. It's something that I know has been around at least since 2016. And audio describe, so videos, you have captions, which are for the hearing impaired, but audio description is for those that are visually impaired. It provides a spoken description of key visual material, a description of what's happening online, where there might only be images on the screen or action on the screen that the closed captioning isn't describing or accounting for. It's the in-between dialogue or the subtlety of how someone looks or gestures with their hands that could be a big part of a story. But I also was thinking, like with, I saw something recently, a video that was a historical footage, and there were archived images going across the screen, and that would be a really great case for using audio described video. So I have a quick clip here from, sorry, it's not a library content, but from The Lion King, to just illustrate how the audio described video works. I don't know why that Okay, so that gives a little indication of how the audio described video works. It definitely would interrupt hearing the music in the background and how that might impact the story. And then I just wanted to add that I learned about audio described video from ProQuest, and I believe that they offer a free service to libraries to add audio described video. So if it's something that if you're often creating videos at your library and you don't have time to do that, I believe they have a free service now for that. The next thing I wanted to mention is the WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Faye also mentioned WCAG. So the current standard is 2.1 and AA that people should be meeting that standard. And the 2.2 guidelines are in draft form and they build upon each other. So the 2.2 is building upon 2.1, and when they have these draft guidelines out and available, anyone is free to comment on them. So if there's something that you find problematic or that should be additionally implemented, you can make comments and the working group will take that into consideration. There are several new things added in the guidelines. I'm just going to touch on one of them, which ties back to Faye's talk and a little bit about the text contrast. So one of the things that's really important for the screen readers, as well as the navigation on a web page, is this contrast ratio. So this illustrates that contrast ratio with a couple different colors and also in reverse in that third one down there with the test 2. And then my last thing I wanted to share about is, I don't know if everyone's familiar with an EEAAP, an Equally Effective Alternate Access Plan. So sometimes technology is not accessible to students with disabilities. And so this can be an issue since accessibility is legally mandated, that institutions need to comply with Section 504 as well as the Americans with Disabilities Act. So to counter that, if there is a technology that you want to be using or need to use in a instructional session or online, you can create an EEAP, an Equally Effective Alternate Access Plan. So I'm just going to review real quickly what the 7 components of an EEAAP are, just to give you a little familiarity. So the first thing is to describe the issue. It's a known accessibility issue, so you would describe what the system or software process is. The second thing you would list would be the persons or the groups that would be affected or possibly affected by that issue. And if you know that total number, that's helpful to list there, but I don't think that is absolutely necessary. But is it the general public? Is it visitors? Is it students? Is it employees at your institution? Third thing is, who is responsible for providing the Equally Effective Alternate Access Plan? And then how will that plan be provided? And you'd want to detail the departments and persons responsible for providing that, as well as what the 5th component is, the resources required, any additional training, equipment, staff to help with this known issue. And then the last 2 are repair information, any repair information. If there were an issue, like would you need a vendor or a third-party servicer, or is it something that your IT could repair or that you yourself could repair? And then a timeline for unforeseen events, so that if there were an accommodation and there were some issue and you needed something either outside or on campus, how would you resolve those questions? And then you'd want to think about any possible part to an EEAP. So that could be your instructional materials, websites, videos, audio files, office products, lecture capture, web or video conferencing, learning management systems, computers, laptops, smartphones, tablets, software, apps, all these things we're all familiar with, but sometimes overlook. Our last slide has our email addresses, and I understand the slides will be provided from the HSIG group. So we're happy to answer any additional questions or anything that may have come up in the chat while we were sharing. And my last concluding thought is just that accessibility is both a journey and a team effort, and it's definitely helpful to have others at your institution to talk about accessibility. We have, at our institution, we have a new accessibility working group, and we're working on that policy that will be implemented campus-wide. And often technological barriers on campus are easily and unintentionally overlooked, so it's good to work together. So thank you for listening to our presentation and having us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to both Faye and Megan for presenting. We'll take, they'll attempt to answer any questions that were presented in the chat, and we're going to welcome Molly Higgins and Rachel Keiko Stark for the next presentation. And give me just a moment and I will get the slides up for you. All right, you are welcome to proceed.
Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Keiko Stark and I'm here with Molly Higgins. We'll be talking about live searching beyond show and tell, or as our subtitle states, now that we live our entire lives online, how can we still create interactive, student-centered learning environments? So I am going to turn off my video. I recently had eye surgery and have to wear these goggles whenever I look at a screen, but I wanted you to know I am a real person. All right, so just a quick background again about us. I'm the Health Sciences Librarian at Sacramento State University in Sacramento, California, and Molly Higgins works at the Library of Congress with a specialty in instruction. If we could have the next slide, please. We both get to have this joy where we have to specifically state these things. So I will say the information presented here represents my personal views and does not reflect the views of the California State University system, nor the views of California State University, Sacramento.
I hereby officially declare that I am not here representing the Congressional Research Service, and the views expressed herein are my own and are not presented as those of the Congressional Research Service or the Library of Congress.
Thank you, Molly. Next slide, please. So we want to take time to acknowledge that we are unwilling settlers on land that belongs to the Native and Indigenous peoples. In my area, this is the Ulatish tribe.
In the Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland area, where I am presenting from, there are a number of tribes, including the historical Anacostan and the Piscataway and Pamunkey tribes. I acknowledge that I am an unwilling settler on these Native tribes' lands, and I accept that and thank them.
Yes,
Next slide. So what we're going to do in the next very few minutes is we're going to talk about a pretty simple framework for ways that we think about making more interactive webinars, and then we're going to go through a quick example of how that is done. So the first question is, what's the point? Why should we make our classes more interactive? First and foremost, more teaching in a student-centered environment means more students creating the content, and that means less talking from the teacher standpoint, and that is always a good thing. Less talking from the teacher standpoint also means that you get more time to observe what students are doing and gives you time to do ad hoc assessment, you can get a little further up the Kirkpatrick scale and say, not just what are they reacting to, but does it seem like they are absorbing the content? And third, and most importantly, creating a student-centered environment gives students more control over the environment and lets them explore in their own time and have a more memorable, more deeply seated experience with the content. Next slide, and I believe the next slide goes with a poll.
I am presenting that poll now.
Thank you. So for those of you who are with us, take a minute, click into the poll, and we want to gauge a sense of, it says host and panelists cannot vote. So, all right, I'm not voting, but for all of the attendees, go ahead and let us know how you feel over this idea of having less control over your classroom and giving more control to your students and participants.
We're getting answers in quickly. We have almost all participants here. We're at 80%.
Hey, I'm so glad that you're here during lunchtime and you're not just, well, lunchtime for those of us on the East Coast. I'm glad that, you know, you're actively still here in the webinar and not kind of looking at it while you shovel food into your mouth.
All right, if we're ready, we're going to go ahead at just over 80% and present the poll. Sharing results.
The results are in. Most people are excited about having more interaction. I think that's generally how I feel, but I definitely recognize that makes me nervous is a close second, and it can be some combination of the two, right? You want to, it's exciting, but also there's a little bit of nerves going on, and I want to affirm that being a little bit nervous means that you're continually pushing the boundaries of what makes you comfortable, and that will make you a better presenter, right? You're never going to feel so comfortable that you lose the fire. All right, we can close that and we can go on to the next slide. Let's talk about ways to be more interactive. Next slide. When I was in school, we had this framework for talking about literature and conflict in literature, where there were 3 types of conflict. You could have man versus nature, or man versus himself. And if we look at this diagram as a way to create interaction, we can use this similar framework to talk about how we can create interaction. You can have participants, that's the little face up at the top, and you have participants interact with other participants. You can have breakout rooms. You can have them collaborate on Google documents. You can have them talk to each other in the big chat. You can have a participant or a student interact with a tool represented by the big rain cloud. So if you have students interacting with PubMed and trying out a search, or if you have students taking some kind of a quick quiz, they're interacting with the tool, they're trying it out, man versus nature. And then finally, you can have students interact with themselves. I think especially in an online environment, our default way of interacting is having the presenter control everything and push it out to the students. And that feels easy because we're not giving up control, but by centering the student, we're giving up control. And we're asking them to do more than just listen, right? In the same way that we had you participate in the poll, we want to encourage you to have students take time to think during the class and absorb and reflect during the class, rather than expecting them to do it on their own after a webinar. So, next slide. I want to encourage you to not be afraid to leave the webinar window. Yes, Webinars have tools like polls, they have tools like chats, they have tools like breakout rooms, but that doesn't mean that you can't have your participants leave the webinar. And this can mean writing something down on a piece of paper, interacting with themselves. It can mean writing something down on a Google Doc, like we said, or trying out a tool, like we said. And in these cases, audio is really your friend to help bring students back. We recommend giving a set time, saying you have 2 minutes or you have 4 minutes to do this. And then I am going to make some preset sound, like a chime or a bell, that will bring everyone back together. We also recommend trying the sound out before you leave the webinar room so they know exactly what to listen for. So we've talked about the framework, right? There are different ways to interact and there are different modalities that you can think of. And the more modalities that you put into one webinar, the more alive and the more interactive it will feel. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about an activity that we use in one of our webinars about reducing implicit bias in reference services. And we're going to show you this activity that incorporates all 3 of the modalities for interaction that we just talked about. So Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to you.
So if we go to the next slide, please. So we are going to, in the next 3 minutes, actually try what we have described, and we are going to encourage you to go live searching. So what I'm going to do is we're going to ask you to look for information on COVID-19 and racial disparities, and then we're going to play this fun little song, which hopefully y'all can hear from my... All right, so if you hear that, please come back to the webinar and share what you found on COVID-19 and racial disparities. And you have, sadly, 1.5 minutes. Go and fly. Whichever you feel comfortable with, Suzanne. If you want to go into your personal discovery, you want to go online. Again, this is very condensed because we have very short time. Perfect. Thank you, Rosalind. Google does have many articles. So you can see that by bringing people back into this chat, we're getting some really good examples. And at this point, I would continue with the song to let people know it is now time to come back. So I can see things are flying fast and furious in the chat. People are providing links. This is a really good way to engage and interact with your participants in your webinar. And it allows them to share, maybe something that they're very passionate about or an area that they're particularly familiar with, and to work within the group. We are getting some excellent articles. Thank you so much to everyone who is participating. So if we could go ahead and get the next slide, please. So after people in our class provide their searches, and we do try to give them a little bit more structure usually, but y'all are expert searchers on this, so I'm sure you're having a great time. We asked them to share what their strategies were, what the results were. We asked them to look where they were considering their searching, and if there are other resources that might be something that they had overlooked or maybe were unfamiliar with. And then we show them what those resources are and ask them about how they would modify what they do. We also use this opportunity to learn about, or to encourage our participants to learn about their own personal biases and to reflect on biases that are in the library systems that we all operate on and within. If I could get the next slide, please. So, sorry. I feel like maybe we missed one, but that is okay. We might have missed a slide.
I think we may have missed the slides on planning your search and running your search and went straight to the reflection thing.
Oops, that was probably me.
That is totally okay. Neither Molly nor I have the ability to have these wonderful automatic transcriptions. So Anna very kindly agreed to run this for us. So thank you, Anna. And we will take any questions we might have. And again, we apologize for this very abbreviated example.
Yeah, so there was a question earlier about, do you let students use Google or do you try to direct them towards specific databases? And while we are certainly very supportive of our traditional academic databases that we often pay big money for, or PubMed because it's available to everybody, a lot of academic databases and PubMed have hidden biases in them. And so we want to have a really honest conversation about the pros and cons of different places. And if we are in a situation where we have a lot of public librarians, we want to be respectful of the fact that they might have a lot of patient information questions where their patrons might be relying on Google search as their primary search database. So we recognize that Google has an important place in these searches, and we don't necessarily discourage people from using it. We prefer to have a conversation about when and why you might use it.
And this is a presentation.
We also,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Molly. Go ahead, Molly.
so we had a question, what types of things have students brought up in terms of bias in searching or information sources? So one of the things that we often talk about is the vocabulary used in official taxonomies and ontologies to describe certain populations. There's often talking about the difference between, in medical research, what's the difference between racism and racial disparities, how much multilingual or non-English materials are available for patient education, and often talk about where bias exists in the medical literature as well, often with patient populations that are used in clinical trials. One thing that was very interesting that someone brought up at one of our recent webinars was, what does it mean when populations for patient education, when patient populations have been mistreated historically by the government or by the medical profession, and that's created a deep distrust of official information sources or a stronger likelihood to believe in conspiracies because the things that have been done to them seem so terrible that they could only be a conspiracy. And that's a really amazing conversation that we don't have time for. Can we go to the next slide just so people can see the credits so that you know where all of our wonderful, wonderful designs come from?
Yes, and thank you again for everyone's questions. We're very sorry if we haven't been able to answer your question. Please feel free to contact us through email, Twitter, whatever you're comfortable with, and we'll be happy to answer any questions there.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Molly. Thank you, Rachel Keiko-Stark. Thank you to all of our attendees today. I know many of you have to move on to the next thing as our lives are quite busy. We want to give another big thank you to ACRL for helping us put this together. And a big thank you to all of our presenters today. We want to invite you again to join us on July 24th for the next part 2 in this series. We will be sending out by email to many listservs the way to register for this, but we're also popping it into the chat right now. And everybody enjoy your weekends, and we hope we will see you again on July 24th for the next session.
Thanks, everyone. If you feel you are interested in saying goodbye by turning your video on, if you can turn video on, feel free to turn your video on and say goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.